Hello and welcome to Charity Champions, the podcast where we speak to leaders from across the charity and not-for-profit sector about the realities of leadership, the lessons they've learned and the challenges and opportunities shaping the sector today. I'm your host, Emily Formby from Charity Recruit, and in this episode, I'm joined by Helen Barnard from Trussell. Helen has had a fascinating journey through research, policy and operational leadership, from starting her career in research and evaluation through leadership roles at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, and now she's helping shaping policy and strategy at Trussell. Helen brings an incredibly thoughtful perspective on poverty, leadership, evidence and how organisations can create meaningful change. Helen, it's absolutely brilliant to have you with us. Thanks for joining me today.
Hello, lovely to be here.
And for those of you who might not know you, do you want to start by introducing yourself and telling us a little bit more about your current role at Trussell?
Yeah, so I am Director of Policy and Research at Trussell. So that means I'm responsible for the development of our policies, which are aiming to end the need for food banks in the UK, the research that underpins the evidence, the research that underpins everything we do, and thinking about our kind of political direction and how we relate to different governments across the UK.
Wowzers, there's so much in there, isn't there? And particularly at the moment with the current economic climate, you know, things are changing all the while. Talk me through how you began, your career and moved into this role that you're in now.
So I started as a researcher. So my trade is a researcher, working for research agencies and doing contract work mainly for government departments. So basically lots of policy development, policy evaluations. So I did quite a lot on housing for a while. So right. Evaluating the first, what they call choice-based lettings policy, doing quite a lot on education, looking at the role of different educational policies, labour markets. I remember one fascinating project was going into prisons to evaluate basically an employment programme which was being run for people who were going to be leaving prison within a few months, right, to try and equip people to go out and get a job. So that was amazing, was going into lots of different prisons and interviewing prisoners, staff, people running the programme.
Wow.
And also I remember the other one that really stuck with me, doing research into family homelessness. So when what was then it's the housing department, it's had lots of different names, but housing. They commissioned the first piece of research into family homelessness. So again, kind of going in to interview people in hostels and temporary accommodation to understand how it was affecting children and young people as well as the adults.
And in those scenarios, how are you getting people to open up to you? What's your strategy for getting the information that you need from people?
So I mean, it's kind of the essence of research, isn't it? Particularly qualitative research. And I think it starts with how people are recruited. So you work with recruiters and they are vital to the whole research process because they are the people who are introducing somebody to what you're trying to find out, why you want them to be involved, and hopefully creating a sense of safety that people will feel that their experiences and views will be valued and that they will have kind of control over what they share, what they don't share, how the information is used. So that's the kind of first thing. So before I ever meet them, the brilliant recruiters. And then it's about going in and kind of setting an atmosphere of openness, of wanting to understand where people are coming from, of not ever judging what someone is saying to you. You're there to understand, not to judge. Yeah. And later on, obviously, you do all the analysis and think, well, what does this mean? But in the moment, it is all about that person and listening to them and enabling them to share what they want to share and what will help you understand the research questions.
Wow. So once you've got all that background information, what's the process then? What are you doing with that information and how is it benefiting people?
So, I mean, obviously you then go into analysis, and these days there is a lot of tech that helps with that. When I started, it was all quite kind of manual going through themes and things, and then there's software that makes it all a lot faster now. And actually, AI is being brought into research processes a lot more these days.
Really?
Yeah, so particularly around analysis of transcripts and so on. You can speed up the process, you can use more information, but also you can kind of free up researchers to be doing the value added of thinking about what does this actually mean and the insight, because you can get AI to do some of the initial kind of legwork, basically.
Yeah, I see.
And the key thing in all of these things, so if I'm going in and evaluating a government policy, what you want to understand is this policy, is it working? Is it delivering the aims of the policy? Is it delivering what the people who are affected need it to deliver? And what are the kind of constraints? So I remember some very early work looking at what people may know as the sanctions regime that the Department for Work and Pensions has. Right. So a whole set of essentially financial penalties that if somebody claiming Social Security, if they judge you not to be meeting the obligations, you literally get your money docked for a certain period of time.
Right.
And we see the impact of that actually at food banks, because what you see is people who didn't have enough money for essentials to begin with suddenly getting some of that money knocked off, and are just left often in incredible hardship. But I remember being part of a very early evaluation of the initial sanctions regime to understand, the kind of the goals of the policy were to essentially shape people's behaviour, to get people to engage with support, to get them to apply for jobs, do those things.
Yeah.
And that key question of, well, did it actually achieve that? And again, I remember going out interviewing people, and one of the key things was a lot of people did not know they'd been sanctioned because their money varied so much and nobody ever explained it to them at the time.
Really?
And so you'd have people who are like, well, I know I haven't got enough money this month to pay the rent, pay my bills. I don't really know why though. And it was like, okay, fundamentally, if your goal is shaping behaviour and people do not understand the regime you've set up, or the reason they're sanctioned, that people are like, well, the thing is, the bus didn't come, so I had to get a different bus, so I was late for my appointment, so I got sanctioned. I don't really know what I could have done about that. So that was, the regime has evolved since then. But for me, again, it's stuck in my mind, that kind of, you create a government policy to try and have an effect on people. If you've done that without the involvement of people with experience of that system, it is highly likely to not land in the way you think it will, not achieve the policy goals, and create harm, which is what we've seen a lot with the way the current sanctions regime works. It doesn't, by and large, get people into jobs faster or in a sustained way. It does cause hardship. Actually, it pushes a lot of people further away from the labour market, because if you can't afford food and bills and the bus fare to get places, you're not going to be in a good position to get a job.
Yeah, absolutely. So what originally drew you into this space?
So, fundamentally, it starts with curiosity, with just wanting to learn, wanting to understand what is happening in the country, why things are happening, and how do you make people's lives better? So I kind of came out of university with a fundamental thing. I wanted the work I did to be interesting, and I wanted it to have a positive impact on the communities around me. And so the two things, kind of research, kind of hit both buttons, because you're always learning. It's always fascinating to find out about people, to understand a new area of policy. And you can feel that you are helping to shape better policy that will improve people's lives.
It's absolutely fascinating, isn't it? I know when we'd spoken originally, before the podcast, we'd talked in quite a bit of depth, and you'd mentioned, there's a sort of different focus from asking the question of how do you actually solve something, from understanding the problem. So you've got the problem and the understanding of it, and then actually how do you solve it? What's the difference in those two mindsets?
Yes, that is really interesting. And you see quite a lot in some kind of policy work that, or things like calls for evidence, when government does calls for evidence, it is, for many people and organisations, it is much easier to describe the problem than it is to kind of come up with or advocate for solutions. And that's something that I think, when I was doing research, a lot of the time what you're doing is describing the problem really, really well in, ever greater detail and granularity. And that is the start. You can't solve anything if you don't understand it. But it is I think it's much harder to go from this bit of the system isn't working to, and here is how you fix it. And so that's something that I'm always very keen for, kind of the various different policy teams I've worked with. The thing I'm always pushing for is we need to tell people how to solve it, not just tell them they need to solve it. And it can't just be principles. So what you also get is you get a really good description of, for instance, the social security for disabled people is not working. It is not protecting disabled people from hardship. It is not supporting it sufficiently participation. Nobody within that system believes it's working well. And you can describe that in immense detail, and lots of people have. You can then say, so what kind of system do we want? And you can say at a really high level, we want a system that is dignified and that makes decisions quickly and accurately and protects people from hardship and enables participation, all of which is right. However, saying that to a government policy team who have been tasked with reforming the system doesn't actually help, because they're like, yes, of course, we would all like a fast, accurate, dignified system. The question is, how do you do that? What are the tangible changes we could make which would bring us closer to those principles? So that's always what I'm kind of urging people doing policy outside government to do, is, give them tangible things you want them to do and explain to them exactly how those tangible things will deliver better outcomes. Because without that, you're unlikely to make much change.
So looking back to your time at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation, I know there was a significant organisational shift whilst you were there. Is there a specific example from what you've just said, where you implemented that philosophy and it did change the way that you did things within the organisation?
Yeah, I mean, it was really interesting. So kind of the journey that JRF has been on is, I feel like my journey has very much been kind of a small part of the journey JRF has been on. Yeah. So when I first joined years ago, JRF was basically mostly a funder of academic research across about 12 different topic areas. So poverty, I think now people who know JRF, it is very clearly a poverty-focused organisation. That wasn't the case when I joined. There were 2 of us working on poverty, nobody else particularly interested. And we were mostly funding academics to do research. And we had a kind of broad desire for that research to have an impact in the outside world, but we didn't really have a kind of theory of change or a way we would achieve that. It was kind of, we will push these things into the world and magically they will make a difference. And I think over the course of my first few years there, we collectively came to the view that we wanted to be much more purposeful about creating change, and that to do that, you have to do more than fund lots of great academics to do interesting research. So we started by moving to put together programs of research. So not just a project, but a program that has a specific thing it's answering. So one of my early ones was looking at education and poverty, and having a program where we commissioned a set of interlinked projects to answer specific questions which I knew policymakers were wrestling with. So we did that. And then I think what we realised was that to really create change, we actually needed to be able to do our own in-house analysis. It wasn't enough to just commission other people. To be able to respond to policymakers, to respond to moments in time, to really shape what was happening, we needed to be able to do it ourselves. So we set up what was then the analysis unit, which was a group of small, and then it grew a bit, in-house analysts. And I then moved to be the first head of analysis to set that unit up, which was fun because I'm not an analyst. I don't code. I'm a researcher and I do social research, but I'm not an analyst. So my kind of pitch was, you don't want an analyst running this team. You want somebody who is very good at identifying what are the key questions to ask, and very good at saying, when I look at these results, here is what they mean. The kind of so what. I've always called it with research. You read a research report, you get to the end, and have you answered the so what question? And that's what I think I am good at, is the what do we want to know and why, and what does this actually mean in concrete terms to the people we want to influence. So we did that. And then we kind of thought, okay, we're getting really good at analysis and the problem. We want to do more to offer solutions, and that means having a policy team, people who really know about housing policy and really know about labour markets, and can actually come up with ideas and shape them and then take them into policymakers. So we set up a policy team, and I moved over to become lead the policy team, which again, I had never done a pure policy job. I kind of got involved in policy because that's what I wanted to do. But again, I kind of did a pitch, which I did not think would be successful, but was, to say, I can shape a policy team and, put together a group of experts who can really push forward the agenda on the areas we believe are most important for poverty. And we also shifted the organisation to focus on poverty rather than 12 different areas.
Right.
To kind of say, actually, if we're going to make a real dent in this issue, we need to focus.
To be focused,
we can't spread ourselves over this many issues and hope to make a real change in the world.
I know a lot of listeners would relate to that feeling of stepping into a leadership role before you're sort of fully ready. You said you weren't an analyst in the traditional sense when you were going for that sort of head of analysis position. What gave you the confidence to take that leap into that role?
I think it's interesting. Partly I just didn't think I'd get it, and I thought this sounds like an amazing role. I would love to do it. I'm going to throw my hat in. You've kind of got nothing. As long as you have the right mindset, you have nothing to lose. As long as you go into these things thinking this would be great, but there will be 17 people better qualified than me, I'll give it a go.
Right.
And I still think that about, I've never believed I'm going to get any job I've ever applied for. And that's fine. You throw your hat in. If you don't get it, you say, great, they found someone better. That will be good for whichever organisation it is that you're applying to.
Yeah.
But I think I was able. I think because I had been thinking a lot about why we should have an in-house team, I think that meant that I could articulate quite clearly for myself and then for the leaders what it was that team should try and achieve. And I had done a lot of managing analytical projects. So I remember one of my early projects, I was funding and therefore managing, work being done by the Institute of Fiscal Studies. And part of my job was to make sure that projects were being done to the right standard, quality standard. And actually, that was really intimidating, going and sitting down with people as brilliant as the Institute for Fiscal Studies, economists and analysts, and being the person in the room who was asking questions of them. That was like, it's a deep breath moment.
I bet.
But the thing that I really learned through that was that if I engaged my whole brain in a really logical way, thought about what was the question you were trying to answer and what have you shown me so far of how you're doing it, does this all hang together? And what I learned was that asking a question which I was worried might seem a bit stupid or naive, almost always turned out to be the right question to have asked.
And they're often the best questions, aren't they? The ones that seem stupid, and they often actually give you the nuggets of information that you need.
Exactly. And I think I also came at it from a mindset of most of the people we're trying to influence aren't economists or analysts, they're policy people. And so I think I felt I could kind of bring into those rooms and then bring into the analysis team the mindset of a lot of the people we will be trying to influence. So if I don't understand what you've just presented to me, there is a good chance the people you're trying to influence won't understand it. And if you present it to me and I say, well, I have no idea what I'm supposed to do with this information, we haven't told a strong enough story. So because you always get with analysts, they present something to you, you ask questions, their response will always be, I'll go away and do more analysis. In many, many cases, you need to say, no, we don't need more analysis. We need you to put together a stronger insight and narrative about what the analysis you have already done actually means. And so I think part of my role was always to kind of push analysts to do that rather than kind of doing, I mean, sometimes you do want more analysis, but before you do that, you have to know which exact question you need to answer. Because otherwise you just end up with a kind of 50 slide deck, which is fascinating, but by the end of it, you have no idea where you got to.
That's such a good approach, isn't it, to really hone down on the information that you need, and perhaps just it could be as simple as presenting it in a different way that engages the audience and the people that you're presenting it to. So moving on to sort of leadership and team building, you've had or you've built and led multiple teams throughout your career. What do you think makes a really effective team culture?
So I think there's a few different things. I think a sense of purpose is really important. I think for a team to function really well, you need everyone in that team to understand and be committed to the goal you're trying to achieve. You need to have the kind of golden thread. So every day, every person in that team should understand how what they are doing is going to help deliver the mission, whatever that is. And if you're doing something and you're not exactly sure how this relates to the overall goal, then we should probably stop doing it and work that out first. And I think, particularly in our sector, but I think across lots of other sectors, that's why people go to work in the morning. Especially if you're working in a charity or for a purpose-driven organization. So you need to be able to really crystallize what is the difference we are trying to make in the world. What is our role in that? What do we bring as a team, as an organization? So I think that's the first thing, the kind of sense of purpose, the North Star you're heading to, and the golden thread. I think the second thing is about valuing people. So it's about, again, every person in that team is there for a reason. And each person needs to feel that their skills and experience and ideas are valued. And that is, that kind of feels like that should be an absolute gimme, but it's not always. And I think that goes along with that is you're trying to create kind of psychological safety for people to challenge leadership in different ways at different times, for people to bring their ideas. I basically like to hire people who know more than me and then argue with them until we get to the right solution. And so that kind of sense of everybody is here, everyone is playing the role, everyone is valued, everyone has good ideas. And I think then there is something about decision-making, delegation, and just getting that right. I would absolutely not claim that I either do now or have always got it right, but I know that that is crucial for team health. So where do different decisions get made? And sometimes you kind of when you go into any new organizational team, you have this golden window where you can say to people, tell me everything that really annoys you about how you currently work and about this place and this team. Tell me everything you really love about it. And then you kind of see, okay, how much of what's really annoying people can I fix? Because that will let them thrive. And one of the things I've heard multiple times in different places, different teams, is I don't know how decisions get made. And it feels like I have to ask five different people for every decision. And I don't really know which of them is making the decision, but I worry if I leave anyone out, I'll be in trouble for some reason.
Right.
People want clarity. They want to know what are the decisions they can take independently and what is the decision maker and the process for what they're doing. because otherwise you can just burn time, and you find, you burn time and people get frustrated. So I think clarity of decision making and being comfortable with what are you delegating and what are you holding at a leadership level, and just pitching that right for your organisation and your culture.
Yeah. I love this idea of psychological safety. That's a great phrase. Talk me through how that's worked for you. How do you create that for your teams?
I mean, you should probably ask them if I actually create it. I would like to think I would, but I would not make assumptions. I think it's a lot about, there is a lot about role modelling. So for both a leader and for managers. So role modelling, asking people questions, being respectful of the answers, demonstrating that you value what people have said. I think there is also, it's something I think kind of trying to be purposeful about your power in a situation, in a room, in a conversation. So there's been lots of times where I have almost wanted to dial down my own presence or power or influence in a situation because you want to hear from other people. And there are times where, particularly, so if as a leader, if you start a conversation by giving your view, you need to think, are the other people in this room going to feel able to challenge that?
Yes.
Or have I just inadvertently shut down everyone else's views?
Yeah.
And, and there are situations where you want to go in and set a frame and say, here's what I think. But there are lots of situations where you want to start by saying, here's the problem, here's the thing we're trying to define, tell me what you think, and kind of pick up from people. And I think it's just being purposeful about how you want that conversation to go, and being willing to change your mind as well. There's been plenty of things over the years where people in my team have directly changed my mind about things. And that's a good thing, that's helpful.
Yeah. Well, absolutely. And I think it's about having that openness, isn't it? And that ability to take on other people's suggestions, ideas and thoughts. I mean, a lot of the work that you're involved with is emotionally difficult, isn't it? How do you manage that from a team health point of view?
It is, and I think that's a really interesting one. And again, I think particularly in the charity sector, where you are a lot of the time, you're working on really difficult issues. You're trying to help people with very difficult situations. And if you're in the kind of policy change space, you are trying to create change in really difficult contexts, and it's slow and it's hard and it's, you get reverses. And I kind of think back to, so last year, people may or may not remember, it emerged that the government was wanting to make very big cuts to disability benefits. And from a Trussell point of view, about 3/4 of people coming to food banks are disabled or live with someone who's disabled. We see in our research and just day by day on the ground how much hardship disabled people already face, how difficult those benefits are to access. So this was a proper kind of code red. And we had modelling to say, if these cuts go ahead, it will be so devastating for people. So it's a kind of code red, right? These things are coming. We have to saddle up for this. And we needed to pivot from a bunch of other work we were doing to put together a kind of team, pull them off other work to just focus on trying to combat these disability cuts. And it happened, our team was just amazing. It would kind of happen within about 2 days. We had this stuff set up. We were getting email UMP actions out within a few days. We were working with a group of other disability and poverty organisations, and we had our WhatsApp groups, and we were all sharing intel and sharing ideas, and our team it was just phenomenal to kind of watch them go. But one of the things I remember is saying at the beginning to people, we need to think about how this is going to feel for all of us. It's going to feel really emotionally difficult. I think there is a high chance that we aren't going to win this battle.
Right.
And we need to know that from the beginning. But if we can make this as difficult as possible for the government, even if we don't win this battle, we will make it much less likely they come back and do something similar again in the future. So even if we don't win everything right now, we will have achieved something really important. And so actually kind of calling out the emotional side of it and narrating that for and with people, I think is really important. You need to name what's happening. You need to name, this is feeling awful, we're feeling devastated and scared, and you get into it, we're also now feeling really tired and we don't know, so actually but having that kind of strand in what the team are talking about and naming and experiencing together. It's really easy to make all those meetings just about the nuts and bolts of what we're doing. But there is something really important about narrating the emotional stuff, creating space for people to say how they're feeling, playing back the wins, really playing back to people what you've just done is amazing, along the way. Simple things like just expressing how grateful you are as a leader to this amazing stuff your team is doing. And actually for us, there was also something about, there were people outside that working group who were picking up extra work to free up people to work on this. So when we were kind of narrating to the wider organisation what we were doing and why, kind of acknowledging that wider group who were all contributing was really important, as well as acknowledging that core team who were working all hours and so on. And I think the other thing that I was very cognizant of was, this was a kind of emergency and we threw it all together, and we were, I think, together, we were all happy to really kind of go all in. But I knew there were lots of people who were working outside normal hours at times, who were putting a lot into it. And again, kind of being really keeping an eye on that and talking to people about, I know everyone's working really hard. If there is a pause, please take some time back straight away. If there's a day where you've done everything, take the afternoon as flexi, get some sleep, get some rest, trying to kind of keep people cognizant of how they might be. And then at the end, when we finish this particular thing, saying, okay, I want everyone to take a breath and we need to change rhythm now, because we've been working at this very intense rhythm, which we had to do. However, none of us can sustain that. So now very purposefully, take a step back, stop working so fast, take a breath, let's go into a more normal rhythm so we can saddle up for the next thing.
Yeah, and be ready for the next one. So in this role that you're in now with Trussell, it's a very much policy sitting side by side with the operational side of things. How has that changed the way that you think about policy and system change, being in this role?
That's what attracted me to Trussell, was the kind of being able to do the policy and research work that I've always done in different organisations in an operational organisation that is supporting 400 food bank charities across the country. And when you go and visit food banks, you kind of the conversation will kind of seamlessly blend the government policy that they are working with us to campaign on, something the local authority is doing that they want to try and change, and the fact that they've just had a flood in the warehouse and they've got to move a load of stuff, or they need to get a new volunteer manager in because someone's just had to leave. And so that kind of blend of the kind of systems change and operational considerations, and the way they interact, I find really interesting. I love going to visit a food bank and just hearing about all the different things they're doing. But also there is insight and knowledge and ideas that you get from people who are working on the front line, which you can then blend with policy and research. So we've been working on this policy for however long, a couple of years. So the government launched a new local crisis and resilience fund earlier this year, which is basically a multi-year fund which will enable every local authority in England to fund support for people who are experiencing financial crisis or shocks. So there'll be cash grants. So if you're on a really low income and your washing machine breaks down, you almost certainly haven't got any savings. You either have to live without a washing machine, which is a nightmare, or you often have to go into debt in order to get it fixed. And that debt hangs around your neck. And we see this at food banks all the time, a kind of financial shock like that, like something breaking down, or you lose a couple of shifts, is enough to tip people into needing food bank. So we knew that from our research and from our work on the ground that this was a really important issue. And we had seen in local authorities across the country, we had seen that where some of them did have a really good scheme, which gave cash first grants and so on, and advice services, it could really, really transform people's lives. And so we wanted to pitch to what was then the new government, that we need a long-term multi-year fund to get local authorities to do this, and we want it designed in the ways that we know will have most effect. And that was brilliant. So we had kind of our evidence team did a really good evidence review, really kind of robust evidence review of how local crisis support was delivered across the country and what you could learn from that. The policy team were developing really smart, tangible, tailored, how would this look? What's our pitch to politicians about what it's for? What should it be called? So the name of it is something we suggested. And then also the policy team working with food banks across the country to gather in, what have you seen work? So what would you want your local authority to do with this money? And how have you seen similar pots used in ways that are ineffective? And so we could bring all that together and also work with partners in the sector. I found the Independent Food Aid Network, Policy and Practice, a think tank, End Furniture Poverty. We had a kind of sector coalition, pooling our knowledge, our evidence, our ideas, speaking with one voice to government. And that was amazing, and we had DWP officials going out to visit food banks. We arranged visits so they could sit with food banks and hear, this is what we see, this is what would help, this is what wouldn't help. We had our lived experience experts. Again, we facilitated DWP talking with lived experience experts to understand how this plays out in people's lives and how something like this could prevent a short-term shock turning into long-term hardship. So it's an incredible privilege to be able to blend all those different elements and then see it actually happen. The government put 3 years of funding, policies out there. Our communities team are now working with food banks to try and make sure local authorities implement it properly in different areas. And then we will also be gathering in the learning to feed back into policy. And, that's amazing. You don't get to do that very often.
And it sounds like the sort of collaborative piece there was really key to the success of that. How important is collaboration with other organisations to the Trussell organisation? How much value do you put on that?
I mean, it's pretty much at the heart of everything we do. I can't think of anything that we do that we are not working in collaboration. And and it's kind of recognizing where is our expertise, where is our added value, and what do other people bring. And also, with policy and campaigning work, if you're going to get anywhere, you have to have a community. You have to have, a gang of people all doing it together. And it's been amazing. So working on the disability benefits reform with obviously disability-led charities, with poverty charities, being able to kind of pool everyone's brains together and work out where we want to get to. It's crucial. We do a lot of work obviously with advice in the advice sector, and so our partnership with Systems Advice is kind of at the heart of what we do. We work very closely with my old friends at the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. We jointly run the Essentials Guarantee campaign. And I think for us, the kind of our underlying approach is it's the big tent approach. So the way I think of it is that we are trying to spread a big tent to bring people in to walk with us on this journey, to campaign with us, to learn with us. And it's something that I have come to believe about achieving social change, is you need to reach beyond your most natural allies. You need to reach beyond the people who already agreed with you and bring together a big tent. And you don't have to agree on everything. That's something I sometimes worry. People kind of think you can only work with somebody if you agree on everything. And actually, lots of people I've worked with over the years, I've worked across the political spectrum. I've worked with people with whom I fundamentally disagree on an enormous amount. We agree on the thing we're working together on. And that, people can think differently to you, and that doesn't make them evil or stupid or mean their views have no value. It's just we disagree, and I have some of the people I respect and value most are people who I disagree with most profoundly on a whole bunch of things.
That's amazing. So, I mean, looking back at your career so far, is there anything that you know now that you wish you'd have understood earlier in your leadership journey?
I think there's probably two things. I think one thing is the job of a leader isn't to solve every problem that's brought to them. And I think you can often feel that obviously you're working with lots of people will bring you things which they're struggling with or which are difficult. And quite often your instinct is to just come up with a solution and hand it to them. And actually, in many cases, it is more helpful to kind of be a sounding board, to kind of support people, to explore what the problem is, to think about what they think the possible solutions might be, to give reflections on what might land and what might not, rather than, and to feel it's okay if you can't solve everything. So I think that's one thing. I think the other is about this issue of decision making and delegation. And I think this isn't something that I think you ever come to a single view about, because it has to flex. But I think earlier in my leadership journey, my instinct will always be to kind of delegate down as much as I can, to trust the people that I've hired because they're really good. That's why I hired them. To kind of let people fly and make decisions. And often that is the right thing to do, and that's good. But I think one of the things I learned in previous roles was that there are times when that is actually abdicating leadership in a way that is deeply unhelpful to the people you're leading. So I remember at one point having felt that I was, doing the delegation and the kind of my team leaders were deciding things between them and were negotiating and so on. I had somebody who was in a very junior role I was chatting to, and they basically told me that this was not working. And what was actually happening was that we were not making decisions as a leadership team about priorities. We were just chatting stuff through, but then letting people go out and work it out for themselves. And the people who were at the sharp end of that were the most junior staff, who had a bunch of different senior people all making demands of them. And they were having to somehow work out what the organizational priorities were. Because we had failed to do that as a leadership team. And so and that was a really useful conversation. And I went away thinking, okay, as a leader, I'm clearly failing my team here, because they are just experiencing a barrage of demands with no obvious way to make sense of those. And they're getting different people kind of pressuring them to do things. And I have not provided a framework to enable them to do that work well, because I have not had the difficult conversation with the leadership team to say, we clearly can't do all of these things. We're going to have to make some trade-offs. We're going to have to make some sequencing. We need to have that conversation in the room and go out as a leadership team, not everybody go out and just try and push their stuff through kind of force of personality.
That comes back to this psychological safety thing, doesn't it? Because that the person that brought that to you obviously felt very safe in the work environment, that she was able to have that honest conversation with you. So I guess that's a real positive from that situation. So finally, I've got one final question for you. If our listeners could take away just one thing from this conversation, what would you hope that would be?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I think that's a good question. I think probably something, just thinking about my own kind of journey, that if something really attracts you and if there's an opportunity there, it's usually worth throwing your hat in and giving it a go.
Yes.
But to always remember that there are multiple great people who can do any role, and not getting a role isn't a reflection on you. It isn't a reflection on your capability. It's just there was somebody better suited to that role at that time for that organisation, and be happy with them and move on. And you've got to go into it. If you can't handle not getting something, that's the reason not to apply. But you can, if you feel like you can do a job, if you feel you can bring enough to it, then give it a go, because at the very least you will hopefully get some useful feedback and be able to think about, if this is your direction, what do you need to build up.
Exactly. That's such great advice. Well, Helen, it's been absolutely brilliant having you on today. Thanks so much for joining me. And I think that our listeners will take a huge amount from your perspective and your honesty on the situations that we've talked about today. So if you have enjoyed today's episode of Charity Champions, please do subscribe and share with your networks, and connect with us on LinkedIn as well. But thank you so much for listening. And Helen, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.